What unsettles a manipulative person the most is not anger. It is not confrontation. It is not even rejection. What truly unsettles them is emotional discipline, because emotional discipline is the one thing they cannot easily predict, influence, or control. Many people assume toxic relationships survive through love alone, but psychologically, that is rarely the full story. Often, they survive because one person becomes emotionally dependent on the approval, attention, or validation of the other. A narcissistic woman, especially one who thrives on emotional control, slowly begins to expect this dependence. She studies your reactions without you realizing it. She notices what hurts you, what pulls you back, what makes you apologize even when you are not wrong. Over time, your emotional patterns become familiar territory to her. And once someone believes they understand your emotional wiring, they begin to assume ownership over your responses. They believe silence from them will make you anxious, distance will make you chase, coldness will make you seek reassurance. This is why many manipulative dynamics become repetitive. The cycle itself becomes predictable. One person withdraws power, and the other rushes forward emotionally to restore connection. But something changes the moment you stop reacting in the expected way. The moment you choose silence instead of pleading, reflection instead of emotional panic, you interrupt the entire psychological structure that once gave them confidence. Suddenly, the version of you they thought they understood no longer exists, and that creates discomfort. Carl Jung once suggested that people are deeply disturbed when they encounter what they cannot control within themselves. The manipulative person experiences something similar when they can no longer control you. Your silence forces them into uncertainty, and uncertainty is psychologically intolerable for individuals who depend on dominance to feel secure. What makes this transformation powerful is that it is not loud. It does not require revenge, insults, or dramatic exits. In fact, the strongest shift often happens quietly. You stop over explaining, you stop defending your worth. You stop begging to be understood by someone committed to misunderstanding you. And in that silence, something important happens internally. Your identity slowly separates itself from their approval. This is the part most people misunderstand. Silence is not about punishing the other person. True silence is psychological detachment. It is the refusal to continue feeding a cycle that drains your dignity. And once a person can no longer provoke emotional reactions from you, they begin losing access to the control they once depended on. Because the moment you master your emotions, you become someone manipulation can no longer reach. What many people fail to understand is that manipulative individuals do not always fear losing the relationship itself. More often, they fear low scene, G access to influence. There is an important psychological difference between the two. Love seeks connection, control seeks reaction. And when your silence removes that reaction, it creates a form of emotional deprivation they are not prepared for. A narcissistic woman often expects emotional continuity. She assumes that no matter how cold she becomes, no matter how many games she plays, your emotional attachment will remain available to her. This expectation becomes part of her internal sense of security. She believes the door will always remain open, that eventually guilt, loneliness, or emotional weakness will pull you back toward her. But silence disrupts that illusion. The absence of your messages, your explanations, your attempts to repair things, all of it creates uncertainty. And psychologically, uncertainty is deeply destabilizing for people who depend on emotional control. They begin questioning the very thing they once felt confident about, their ability to influence you. You. This is why your absence often triggers panic instead of peace. Not because they suddenly discovered love, but because they encountered a reality they did not anticipate, a version of you that no longer revolves around them emotionally. Jung believed that people are often confronted by their shadow when external control disappears. In silence, the manipulative person is left alone with their own insecurity, their own emptiness, their own fear of irrelevance. And without constant emotional feedback from you, they can no longer escape those internal realities. That is why silence becomes so powerful. It forces both people to face the truth. One discovers their freedom. The other discovers how much control they had mistaken for love. Manipulative people rely heavily on emotional predictability. They survive through patterns. They learn when you become vulnerable, when you become impatient, when you are most likely to apologize, return, or seek closure. Over time, your reactions become part of a psychological script they feel confident controlling. This is why your silence becomes so unsettling, because suddenly the script disappears. The version of you they once understood was emotionally accessible. They knew how to provoke you. They knew which words created guilt, which actions created anxiety, and which periods of distance would pull you back into emotional pursuit. But when you become silent, calm, and emotionally restrained, you remove the predictability they depended on. And nothing creates more psychological discomfort for a manipulative person than unpredictability. When someone can no longer read your emotional state, they begin losing their sense of control. Your silence forces them into interpretation. They wonder whether you have moved on, whether you finally understood the manipulation, whether their influence is fading. In many cases, this uncertainty affects them more deeply than open conflict ever could. Carl Jung often spoke about the human. In my desire for control over the unknown, people feel secure around what is familiar, even if it is toxic. But when familiar patterns suddenly collapse, the unconscious mind begins searching for stability. This is why manipulators often return unexpectedly after periods of silence. Not always because of genuine love, but because the loss of emotional certainty disturbs them internally. What changed was not simply your behavior. What changed was your energy. You stopped reacting impulsively. You stopped explaining yourself endlessly. You became emotionally grounded instead of emotionally available on demand. And the moment you become emotionally unreadable to someone who once controlled your reactions, you force them to confront a reality they never expected, that your peace no longer depends on their presence. The moment control begins to disappear, the entire dynamic changes. At first, she may not notice it immediately. Manipulative people often assume silence is temporary. They believe, are you simply upset, waiting, or preparing to return emotionally? But as time passes and your distance remains consistent, a deeper realization slowly begins to form. You are no longer emotionally orbiting around her. That realization is powerful because control in toxic relationships is rarely maintained through force alone. It is maintained through emotional availability. Through your constant attention, your explanations, your need to fix what they repeatedly break. The manipulative person grows accustomed to being psychologically centered in your life. Your reactions become proof of their importance. But when you stop reacting, something unsettling happens. They begin watching you rebuild without them. You become calmer, more focused, less emotionally chaotic. And perhaps most disturbing of all, you begin finding peace without their validation. This is the point where many manipulative individuals experience what Jung might describe as a narcissistic injury, the painful wry. Cognition that they are no longer the emotional authority they once believed themselves to be. What hurts them is not always your absence alone. It is witnessing your transformation in that absence. Because your growth silently destroys the illusion that you needed them to survive emotionally. No dramatic revenge is required, no public victory. Your peace becomes the evidence. And in many cases, nothing unsettles a controlling person more than realizing the individual they once manipulated has become emotionally independent enough to walk forward without looking back. In the end, your silence was never truly about her. It was about reclaiming yourself. Too many people remain trapped in toxic emotional cycles because they believe love means enduring endless confusion, disrespect, and psychological exhaustion. They become so focused on saving the relationship that they slowly abandon their own inner stability. And without realizing it, they begin measuring their worth through someone else's ability to validate them. But there comes a moment when the soul grows tired of surviving in emotional chaos. Carl Jung believed that healing begins when a person confronts the truth of their condition instead of escaping it. And the truth is this: you cannot heal inside a cycle designed to keep you emotionally dependent. At some point, silence becomes necessary, not to manipulate, not to punish, but to finally hear your own mind again without constant interference. Your withdrawal is an act of psychological self-preservation. It is the decision to stop chasing closure from people who create confusion, to stop begging for consistency from those who thrive on instability, to stop sacrificing your peace in exchange for temporary moments of affection that disappear the moment control is restored. And this is where real strength begins to emerge.